Friday. Welcome in. It's In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you, as always. Hope you've had a good week. Hope you're looking forward to the weekend. An off week for Indiana football, but Indiana basketball will, of course, be in action against South Carolina, as we've been previewing all week long. Big thanks to Alec Lasley on Wednesday for chatting about the game with us today. Later on, we're going to be chatting with Kyler Staley, basketball recruiting analyst for HoosierIllustrated.com, to chat all things regarding this upcoming matchup and beyond. We kind of look a little further as well, talking about the upcoming Battle for Atlantis and really the way that tournament could really shape up the rest of the year for the Indiana men's basketball program. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. How you doing? How's your Friday going? I'm still. Some people may think this is a form of complaining, but I do always like to just kind of. I don't mind sharing things about my life, as you all have learned quite frequently this week. But I am still getting used to my new morning shift at work, and if I'm being dead honest, I am exhausted. But I hope that doesn't affect the show or shows moving forward. As with any major job change, there is an adjustment period, and I believe I am in the midst of that right now. I am trying to take afternoon naps to offset the tiredness, if you will. But we're going to enjoy today, and I'm looking forward to chatting all sorts of things with you today. We're not just going to talk Indiana. I got a couple of other things I'm going to get into a little bit. We'll also shout out the non-revenues at the end. We'll go over our college football picks of the week. I've already got a couple of parlays put together, and I'm feeling pretty confident considering last week one of my parlays put together a four-legger, netted me $50. So shout out to the parlays coming through. And also shout out to this coffee for hopefully giving me a bit of an extra jolt here as we get rolling here on a Friday. Where do we start? Do we start with Indiana football? We start with Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. Let's do just that. I do want to start there because this is happening tonight, and this isn't necessarily something that I expected to lead the show, and maybe it shouldn't, but it is. It's a very topical thing, especially today, and I'm actually going to be going to some friends' house, or a friend's house later, and we're all going to be watching the Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul fight. And is it nonsense? It does feel like it is a little nonsensical, if we're being honest. I mean, you got a 27-year-old Jake Paul, former YouTube star, former Disney Channel star. At least I believe he was on Disney Channel. Either him or Logan was. But Jake Paul has kind of turned into a pretty formidable fighter over the years. I believe his record is 10-1, facing the legendary Mike Tyson, who I don't know exactly how old he is now, but I know he's already retired, coming out of retirement just for this specific event. It makes you wonder, is this thing going to be staged? Is it already staged? Is there a result that's going to happen no matter what? And that's why one thing, I don't like betting on fights, because especially fights like this, it seems like there could be so many things that can contribute to the outcome that aren't your typical. This is more than just a fight, right? I mean, this is going to be, I was going to say televised on Netflix. Maybe that's not the proper term for it, considering Netflix is just a streaming service. It's going to be streamed on Netflix. If you have a Netflix subscription, you'll be able to watch that tonight. And it's just we've had so many weird fights over the years. Of course, we had Floyd Mayweather and Logan Paul, I believe, right? That was a couple of years ago. We had Mayweather taking on McGregor. Now, that was more of a traditional fight, even though it was somebody who, or when I say somebody, Mayweather was going up against somebody who does not normally box. Of course, someone like Conor McGregor doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, excuse me. So that was different. But these celebrity fights, if that's what you want to call Jake Paul, I mean, I guess he technically is. It's just strange. Like, what does Mike Tyson have to prove here? And if you listen to this, I'm going to play this piece of sound here in just a second. There was a little girl. She's probably maybe, I'm going to say 12 years old. There's no way to really know. At least I don't know. She's asking Mike Tyson about what this fight means to him and, for his overall legacy. And Mike Tyson gives this girl a very weird answer. And it's not a weird answer in the general sense. It's a weird answer to give a kid who is interviewing you. And I'm going to go ahead and play what Mike Tyson said to this girl, as I'll play the question as well, but here it is.
Well, in your return to the ring for this fight, you are setting a monumental opportunity for kids my age to see the legend Mike Tyson in the ring for the first time. What type of legacy would you like to leave behind when it's all said and done?
Well, I don't know. I don't believe in the word legacy. I just think that's another word for ego. That's just some word everybody grabbed onto. Now it's used every 5 seconds. It means absolutely nothing to me. I'm just passing through. I'm going to die, and it's going to be over. Who cares about legacy after that? What a big ego. So I'm going to die. I want people to think that I'm this, I'm great. No, we're nothing. We're just dead.
I'm going to pause right there. There's more to I'm going to play, but you can hear the deafening silence from the young girl who is asking Mike Tyson this question. This girl does not think about, I mean, no kid this age thinks about death really in any way, shape, or form, I wouldn't think. And of course, Mike Tyson's lived a full life pretty much. And for him to give that answer, it's not necessarily something so out of character, but to give that answer to a young girl like this, it's a little strange. Let me finish off the rest of these comments.
We're dust. We're absolutely nothing. Our legacy is nothing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That is something that I have not heard before, someone say that as an answer.
Can you really imagine somebody say, I want my legacy to be this way when you're dead? Do you think somebody really wants to think about you? I want people to think about me when I'm gone. Who the fuck cares about me when I'm
gone? And excuse the F-bomb. I know this isn't, a technical, this isn't a true radio show, so the F words, they're not like illegal or anything like that, but as sometimes people comment, yeah, this is a family show. And I know they're joking, of course. I mean, it is a family show. I try not to say swear words on this, but man, what a weird answer. What a weird answer, man. And I don't really know if that type of answer was like, if he was just in a weird mental state before he was asked that question, but I feel like, was he unaware of the age of the person he was talking with? Because I don't really know how I would have reacted had somebody like that given me that answer if I was that age, but I can almost guarantee I wouldn't have handled it as good as this girl interviewing him did, right? I feel like I would have just stayed silent. And maybe I would have, I don't know, because I was very much a scaredy cat when I was a kid. To be honest, if you would have told, 8, 9-year-old John that he would be sitting behind a microphone for a living, I don't know that he would believe you. It wasn't really until late middle school that I had even real thoughts about doing something like this for a living. So shout out to that young interviewer who, asked a very simple question to Mike Tyson, and him giving that response, something very interesting. And I know many of you probably didn't know that this was the direction I was going to go down to start the show, but we've been talking Indiana football, Indiana basketball a lot, and I just wanted to switch it up a little bit. And we are going to get into it more, of course. This is an Indiana sports show, so we got to stick to the hard-hitting Indiana sports. It's got to be Indiana football and Indiana basketball all day long. Don't give me none of that Mike Tyson bull crap. I don't want to hear about that Jake Paul, that YouTube fool. I don't know where that came from, but maybe it was the coffee talking. Maybe it was the Friday talking. Maybe it was the lack of sleep talking. But nonetheless, I told you we were going to have a good time today, and that's what I'm trying to do here. So, yeah. Let me know if you're going to watch the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight, because like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be watching it tonight at a friend's house, and I don't really know what to expect. I've heard some people say that they think Mike Tyson might die from getting knocked out from Jake Paul, tongue in cheek, of course. I don't really think he would get hit that hard, but I'm tending to lean more toward Mike Tyson and Jake Paul just, finishing with a draw. But I mean, Jake Paul, realistically, with him kind of being the boxer that he is now, I don't see any reason he shouldn't beat him. Maybe he doesn't have to knock him out, but if I were predicting a winner and knew there was no funny business involved, I'd probably just say it would be a Jake Paul win on decision. And there's your boxing analysis from yours truly. I'm sure that's why you come to In Touch with Indiana Sports, to hear all the hard-hitting analysis on professional boxing, celebrity boxing, if you will. But hey, this is one of the more topical things of the day, and it is what it is. Yeah, but anyway, let me know if you're going to be watching this, and if you're watching this episode after the fight takes place, let me know what you think. Maybe we can react to it on Monday's show, especially if there's something worth talking about, like it's something to take away from this thing. I certainly hope there is. Last thing I'll say about this, during the weigh-in, right? Didn't Mike Tyson, he slapped Jake Paul in the face? Like, that seems so staged, right? It's definitely something. But we'll let that be for your we'll put that story to bed, I guess, if you will. Let's move into a little bit of pieces of Indiana football news before we bring in Kyler Staley to talk a little more Indiana basketball. But on the Indiana football side of things, a couple of interesting things we've been keeping an eye on. First one, because there's not a lot to extrapolate on with this, and that's the potential new contract coming for Curt Cignetti. And there's been talks, reports over the last several days of negotiations being made for, with Curt Cignetti and staff, and to keep him here for the long haul. And I really hope I've seen many people say that they should just give Curt Cignetti a blank check, and I don't really blame people for making that statement, because I don't think there's any scenario where you could have drawn up a better hire. I've seen people mention that this is the next Nick Saban. Now, that's probably jumping a little too far ahead. He is somebody who is from the Nick Saban coaching tree, but we also have to remember this guy is already 63, 64 years old. Now, could he leave a Nick Saban type of legacy in, 7 to 10 years before he inevitably retires? Maybe. But I don't think we should put that sort of expectation on somebody after 1 year. Although if he ends up turning out the way, I don't think that many people would be all that surprised, right? But Indiana, they've won the lottery when it comes to the coaching carousel. And not many teams win the lottery, the coaching carousel lottery, like this very often. And if you're Scott Dolson, the Indiana athletics director, of course, you're doing everything in your power to make sure that this guy is around, not just for one more year, but for 5 years, 10 years, till this guy retires. There's going to come a point where other programs will realize, okay, Curt Cignetti, yeah, he's a great coach, but do we really want to invest the time in this guy now that he's, 69 years old, down the road, whatever it may be? Because there is going to come a time where people or other programs will be thinking about their future and making another hire themselves. And they're going to wonder, okay, yeah, this guy's great, but we're only going to have him for 4 years. There's no guarantee that it's going to work out to where we get a national championship out of him. Why don't we find somebody else who could potentially give us, 10, 15, 20 years? And it was okay for Indiana to take this risk with somebody like that, because nobody had ever taken a risk on Curt Cignetti before. He'd already gone through his whole career and not made it out to the major levels of college football. And again, you're in your 60s and you're finally at a power program job, and albeit one of the worst in history, of course. And he has an opportunity to make this place his home. And really, he's already done something that no other head coach has done, or done many things that no other head coaches have done. And he can only continue to further that the longer he sticks around. And I don't know if any of that stuff matters to Curt Cignetti. But back to my original point, if you're Scott Dolson, you're going to do everything in your power to keep this guy around until he retires, right? That would be, I don't want to say it would be a miracle, but it would be quite the feat if Scott Dolson is able to do what he needs to do to keep this guy around. And earlier on in the year, I was worried that Curt Cignetti was somebody who might be a one and done coach for Indiana. Just because I thought the Florida job was almost certainly going to open up. And now that we know that's not the case, there's really not any other tier 1 level college football programs that are going to be, have openings this year. And certainly nothing that will be appealing outside of the Big Ten or the SEC, right? I think, and you've heard me talk about this with Mitchell, if a head coaching job outside of maybe one of the true like blue bloods like Clemson, heck, and I was going to say Oklahoma or Texas, but they're in the SEC now. It's going to be tough for any opening to be appealing to Curt Cignetti when you're not getting the same level of revenue that you are in conferences like the Big Ten or the SEC. So I think Indiana has another golden opportunity to lock this guy into a deal that not only would he not refuse, of course, but will keep him around for, I mean, you could almost say, hey, here's your retirement contract right now, Curt Cignetti. We'll keep you for the next 10 years and don't screw this up. Don't make us regret this. Now, that might seem like a pretty stupid idea potentially, because what if this does end up being just pie in the sky and next year Indiana's back to, 5-7? And I most certainly do not believe that would be the case. I just do always worry whenever you give someone ridiculous, amounts of money in a contract and, years and ridiculous buyouts. It almost seems like it never works out whenever you do something like that. So who knows? I expounded upon that a lot more than I expected to, but sometimes I get to rambling, and hopefully it's the good kind of rambling. So, but the other piece of football news that many fans will be excited about is the potential for sooner rather than later Memorial Stadium renovations. And I think that's become all the more important for the Indiana Athletics Administration now that Memorial Stadium has sold out, 4 games now? I gotta say 4. I'm including the one that hasn't happened yet with Purdue, because you had sellouts with Nebraska, Washington, Michigan, and Purdue. Yeah, 4 of your 8 home games this year experienced sellouts. And I'm sure if you look ahead to next season, especially after we see how the rest of the season ends up playing out, you may sell out all your home games before you even play a game next year in Memorial Stadium. So I think doing everything you can to update the fan experience, add some club seats, just add better amenities, better restrooms, all that type of stuff, that can only, create a better atmosphere for fans in the coming years for the Indiana Hoosiers football program. And I'm sure that will only reassure Curt Cignetti of the commitment to the new, the Indiana football program while he is here. So Indiana is setting themselves up for success. And I'm going to go back to something I said back before Curt Cignetti was even thought of here at Indiana. Back last year, whenever Tom Allen was kind of heading out the door, we kind of knew that the end was coming for Tom Allen. There was a moment where people were mentioning, man, I don't know if Indiana is really they're willing to pull the plug on Tom Allen leaving right now because his buyout was so big. But I remember saying that if Indiana was going to get serious about football, it needed to be now because of what was coming. The new era of college football. You had a 12-team playoff. You had 4 new teams coming into the Big Ten. You did not want to get left behind in an era where getting left behind is the worst thing that can happen, not only to your football program, but to the rest of your programs that come with, football. That was probably not the best way to say it. But a lot of people in Indiana, of course, they're like, you know what? Basketball's first. And you know what? In the hearts of everybody, that's probably almost always going to be the case. But it goes without saying that almost, and this is not even almost, every successful athletics program at the collegiate level needs to have a good football program that is making them money in order for the other programs to be able to exist. And that includes basketball. Now, Indiana can probably make a little more money off of basketball than others, of course, just because they are known for that and that's been their bread and butter for years. But if you can get football going like Indiana has, that is going to set you up for, years and years, if not decades of success, especially in this era now where having the most money in your, in kind of your back pocket for, players and coaches and that type of stuff, it is more important than ever to check all of those boxes. And I guess, how did I get here for this from the stadium talk? Sometimes I find myself going off in so many directions from my original point that it's tough to circle back around, but hopefully you get the gist of what I was saying with all of that. So, there's your football news. Oh, actually, one more. This is a small piece of news. I say small. I mean, it's a good thing for Indiana. It's just not anything to talk a whole lot about. Indiana flipped a commit for football. Tyrone Burris Jr. flipped him from, I believe it was the University of Louisville. And he's an in-state guy that had initially committed to Jeff Brom in Louisville. And seeing him, change his mind, it's weird in this era of NIL and all that type of stuff. There's so many flipped commitments. NLIs, National Letter of Intents, don't really mean a whole lot anymore. But being able to see a guy see what's going on back in his home state and change his mind and want to come back to see it and be a part of it, that can only be a good thing, of course. So shout out to Tyrone Burris Jr. on deciding to commit to Kurt Signetti and the Hoosiers. All right, let's do some basketball talk. Bring in Kyler Staley of HoosierIllustrated.com. Going to preview Indiana versus South Carolina and talk about a few other things regarding the men's basketball program. So let's let it roll right now. From HoosierIllustrated.com, it is the one, the only Kyler Staley, basketball recruiting analyst. Welcome in. Happy Friday, my friend.
Happy Friday. Thank God. It's been a long, long week. I feel like it's been a minute since I've been on the show. Has it not?
It has been. And I know we had you on, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago. And whenever we had you on then, I remember saying, wow, it's been a while. So we're doing that again. Hopefully it becomes a little more rhythmic now that we're slowly but surely getting into the thick of college basketball season. Of course, the Hoosiers taking on South Carolina this upcoming Saturday. But not too long after that, we'll have the Battle for Atlantis, probably the biggest, few days for Indiana basketball before we fully get into the thick of the season later on down the road.
Yeah, it's going to start picking up really, really quickly. This week's been long just because, there's not really an Indiana football game to really prepare for. Then Ohio State, which that comes next week. So you got a 2-week break. And then Indiana play on Sunday, and that was at noon. So that game was over rather quickly in the day. So it's been a long week, but I'm ready to get back at Assembly Hall on Saturday. It's one of Indiana's bigger non-conference opponents. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a nice test for Indiana. I think it is. South Carolina, they have struggled. They lost to North Florida, I believe, but that North Florida team's actually really good. So don't buy too much stock into an upset or anything like that. But this will be a really good test, you could say, to see where this Indiana team is actually at.
Yeah, and even if this South Carolina team isn't necessarily something that will, challenge you when it comes to NCAA tournament caliber opponent, it will at least give you a chance to see what Indiana will be like against somebody that is from a Power 5 conference, of course. The athletes that they've faced up to this point from SIU Edwardsville and Eastern Illinois, at least they should be nothing compared to what this South Carolina team has. At the same time, though, I think we want to see this Indiana team play a lot more, I would say, clean, at least, or maybe just more pedal to the metal from the get-go, because, of course, the biggest kind of gripe from this team, at least in the first couple of games, and especially against Eastern Illinois, is the fact that they just look tired. They look a little sloppy in the first half, and they definitely responded very well against Eastern Illinois when the second half came around. But when you're Indiana, you don't want to have to question that going into halftime the way that we have so far this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And South Carolina, what I love about this matchup, obviously, South Carolina is not a blue blood or anything like that. I love the fact that Indiana's playing an SEC team because they play a completely different style of basketball than what the Big Ten plays. Pac-12, even when they were there, obviously you're getting the Pac-12 teams and UCLA and all them in there. And then the ACC plays a different style as well. But SEC is just a bunch of athletes. There's a bunch of athletes, very, very athletic program. South Carolina has always had some athletes. The years I can remember watching them. So Mike Woodson has been wanting to play, a more athletic style, a little more fast-paced style. He's going to get that. He's going to get a good taste of that when it comes to South Carolina because they're going to be wanting to push the ball. They're going to be wanting to use their athleticism to make plays. And you mentioned that Indiana's been kind of sloppy these first two games, and, they look a little tired out there. That 12 o'clock game against Eastern Illinois, They were asleep on the court. They were easily asleep. And Mike Woodson even said, he's like, we played like we hadn't gotten out of bed yet. And that's probably true. So it was a rainy day too. The fans weren't in. There was a big emotional football game, the night before. So it was just a recipe for disaster, honestly. But I really like what Indiana did. They did exactly what they needed to do coming out of half. They put their foot on the gas, all pedal to the metal is what you just said. So I want to see Indiana play like that from the start. I want to see them, the opening tip. I want to see them play fast. I want to see them play hungry and aggressive because, quite frankly, this Indiana team has not earned the right to, jog up and down the floor, take their opponents lightly. Like you kind of gotten the sense that they've kind of done so. I don't want to say that, but just kind of the sense of it. This South Carolina team is looking for a big win. They're looking to really erase that North Florida loss. So coming into Assembly Hall, getting a win over a ranked team like Indiana would do huge for them. But Indiana's got to play with energy. They got to play with aggressiveness, right out the gate, on Saturday.
Now, I don't know how much of South Carolina you've watched, and maybe the answer is none. And I would totally understand if you hadn't, because I haven't myself. But if you have, what is it, maybe the strength of the South Carolina team that Indiana will have to find a way to exploit, or their weakness too, I guess I should say?
So you are correct. I have not watched a ton of South Carolina, but just
I wouldn't have expected you to.
From that North Florida game and things like that. They definitely do have some holes. They have some, I don't know what you'd say, just some things that you can exploit, on the court and everything. I mentioned it earlier, the SEC teams, it doesn't matter who it is. It can be Kentucky, Auburn, Alabama. It doesn't matter. They always are going to be athletic. They're always going to be fast paced. And honestly, that's why they do so well in the NCAA tournament. That's why the SEC is probably, other than the Big 12, probably the top basketball conference this year, I would say. There's some question marks with the Big 10, but they do so well just because teams aren't really prepared to play that type of style when they go into the NCAA tournament. Alabama last year did a really good job of being athletic. Kentucky's had athletic teams over the years. Auburn's always a team that's really fast-paced, athletic, that loves to run up and down the floor. And this is a good test for Mike Woodson in Indiana because I think Mike Woodson does want to play NCAA caliber teams that you would see in the NCAA tournament. Not saying South Carolina's that. Doesn't look like they're going to be this year, but this is the type of opponents that you would expect, and it's some opponent that you just don't see a whole lot of. And I think that's going to be good for Indiana because if South Carolina comes out and punches them right in the mouth and, is the aggressor right off the bat, and Indiana's just kind of going up and down the floor, we'll get our buckets when we get them. We'll just kind of set things up and stuff like that. We'll get them in the second half. Don't worry. They're going to lose this game. And you don't want to see that. You want to see Indiana take care of business, play like a top team that they are, get McKenzie and Baco going, get those bigs going. I want to see a little bit more out of Miles Rice as well, but just play with energy right off the bat. It's Saturday. The crowd's going to be there. There's no football game. So I think it's going to be a pretty packed house in Assembly Hall. Just feed off that energy and just go play basketball.
Yeah, and you mentioned Miles Rice, and really in general, we haven't seen a lot from the guards, at least when it comes to the first two regular season games. Miles Rice did have a good game against Tennessee on the road during the exhibition slate. But what do you think is the key for kind of this position of guards that Indiana has this year, whether it be the starters, Miles Rice, Kanan Carlisle, or even the guys coming off the bench? We really haven't seen a ton of good stuff from Luke Goody. Trey Galloway's been a little more quiet. He hasn't been bad, but of course we were expecting him to kind of take a step back when it comes to his role when you had guys like Rice and Carlisle coming in. But what would be a good sign that that position group is trending in the right direction this Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the first two games, the reasons why we haven't really noticed a whole lot from the guards is because, one, McKenzie Baco has been taking the spotlight, and he's been the guy, and the guards don't really have to do a whole lot. Honestly, it's just been easy as give the ball to McKenzie and Baco, let him create, and just go to work. And the same with the bigs. Omar Bella, Malik Renew finally had two really good standalone performances last game, but I will say with Trey Galloway, I think he's been Indiana's best facilitator so far. And I think that's a lot of it. He learned a lot last year of being the point guard for this team. And he's come in and he hasn't played super fast, a lot like Miles Rice has or Kanan Carlisle. Hasn't really pushed the pace all that much, but he's just making right decisions. I mean, that pick and roll game, you saw it last year with him and Khalil Ware. That pick and roll game with him and Omar Bello this year has been money. It's been awesome to watch. So obviously you haven't seen a ton of Gabe Cupps at all too. He's just kind of getting those spot minutes. So something to really kind of watch out throughout the season. But going with the starters, Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle, I think it's just those two just taking a little bit of time to really just find themselves. Not really find themselves as a basketball player, but find themselves in this system. It is new. It is kind of new. It's a new environment. I mean, yeah, they played, it'll be their fourth game in Assembly Hall, but it's still pretty new to them, and they still haven't gotten a full, rowdy Assembly Hall crowd. So that'll be fun to see how it kind of adjusts. Miles Rice, you've seen fast-paced style with him. He's a blur at times. He kind of gets a little bit too fast, I think, for himself. So if he can just slow down and kind of control the pace, be the guy that controls the pace on both ends of the floor, that'd be great. Caden Carlisle, I think he's only scored 5 points total and through 2 games or so. But, he's been awesome on the defensive end. Really, really good. And honestly, for him to try to find that role, a lot of people were like, why isn't he scoring that much? He's not really doing anything on the floor. I would argue, his role right now is to be the best on-ball defender that Indiana has right now. And you've seen that out of him. So those guys will come. Caden Carlisle's offense will come. Miles Rice will come. He'll get his buckets, and he'll be Indiana's top facilitator. But I think it's going to take a game like this for them to really get comfortable. Hopefully they get comfortable. I think they have 2 games before Battle for Atlanta. So, play this game, play within yourself, run the offense, be a great facilitator. The next game, I forget who they play next, but
UNC Greensboro is who they have after this.
Yeah. So just find yourself on the floor, find yourself in this system and just get comfortable. And then when it comes to Battle for Atlanta, you'll be good to go.
Yeah, I think especially before those Bahamas games, you want to see them kind of clock in at least a couple of really good, top to bottom performances. I'm not talking just about the guards, it's really just about the team in general, because we've seen 2 shaky starts to open the season. You got 2 more games before you get, you really up the ante when it comes to the caliber of opponents you will face on back-to-back days, that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of Thanksgiving week. That's going to be a massive week for this Indiana basketball team for a number of reasons, namely because that is your biggest stretch of the non-conference where the results really do matter, especially when it comes to your net rating, NCAA tournament prospects, all that type of stuff. So there's going to be a lot of eyeballs, not only nationally from for that tournament on Indiana, but really a lot of the perception for this Indiana basketball team for the rest of the season will be based on what happens during that Bahamas stretch. And maybe that's unfair. Again, if they do disappoint down there, they will have time, a chance to make that up throughout the rest of the season. But I think it is going to be very important to have some good results whenever they get down to that point in the season.
Yeah, when it comes to the national media and the fan base, obviously, people are very, very quick to judge. That's how it's been over the past few years. Indiana struggles or whatever. It's like, oh, the sky's falling. We got to, fire Woodson. We got to do anything like that. But, go back to the 2016 team, Yogi Ferrell's senior year. They went to Maui, went 1-2, had 2 really, really bad losses. I think the one was to Wake Forest and the other one was to maybe St. John's, UNLV.
Or UNLV, yeah, I remember one of those. Yeah.
So, no, I think they beat St. John's and lost to UNLV, if I can remember correctly. I was there. I should remember this, but I don't. But you go back to that team, and obviously that was a different era of basketball. That was the Tom Crean era. But that team went on to win the Big Ten, regular season. And I think they were like the 5th seed or somewhere like that in the NCAA tournament. They ended up being just fine. So, you want to judge Indiana based on what their performances are going to be versus South Carolina, Battle for Atlanta. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on them. It's Thanksgiving week. People want to watch some basketball. They want to watch some football. There's going to be a lot of eyes on them. There's going to be some people that overreact as well. Indiana can go 3-0, and then we're looking at them. It's like, oh, man, they might be a national championship team.
Yeah.
We go 0-3, and it's just like, all right, time to fire Woodson right now. It's time to figure out.
And that will be – I hate to interrupt you, but, if Indiana does go 0-3, which I think at the very least you should find a way to win one. I think the expectation should be to, based on what we've seen or, with the roster that's been built, 2 of 3 would be considered a success. 3 would be overachieving. But if you go 0-3, I think it would be fair at that point to say there is some concern going forward.
Yeah, and trust me, I don't think Indiana is going to go 0-3.
I agree with you. I don't think that'll come down to that.
If they did, especially when they got to that 3rd game, they're going to be playing a team that's probably not up to the caliber.
Like Davidson or something. They're kind of the G5 team that's
where
in this tournament.
So I think the best case scenario, obviously best case scenario is going 3-0 there. But I think if you look at Indiana beating Louisville, taking care of them, which I think they, based off
they should. They should.
What you saw versus Tennessee, Indiana went on the road and beat Tennessee. Yes, it was an exhibition game or whatever, but those teams were playing like it was the championship game. So they went in and beat Tennessee, and then you see Tennessee go on the road. This new hyped up Louisville, team, Pat Kelsey's team, they go in and just smack Louisville, on their home court. So you got to feel really confident if you're looking at that. On paper, Indiana should take care of Louisville, which I think that they will. And then you go in, you're probably playing Gonzaga. I'd be shocked if they lose to West Virginia. But, winning that game, at least going to the championship game. You may not win that, but just going to that and just
that's a marquee victory at that point if you beat a Gonzaga team like this.
Absolutely. So even if you were to lose to Gonzaga, but you're still competitive, and then you go into that third, well, it would be the fourth or fifth place, somewhere around there in the bracket. You go in there and you win that game because you're probably going to play in some okay competition there, probably like a West Virginia-esque or something like that. You go in there and you beat them handily or whatever, you still come out pretty good. You got to remember at the end of the day, it is a tournament. It's not one and done or anything like that. It's a part of their schedule. So, you're going to see where the chips fall and everything. You know who you're playing first. It's Louisville. Take care of business with Louisville, then just see what happens there and just be competitive. So there's going to be a lot of Indiana fans there. I know they're going to travel well. Indiana might even have number one team when it comes to traveling to the Bahamas this year, just because, people love these types of events. It'll be fun, but just go in, take care of business with Louisville, compete, and then see what happens with this and just, come out of the Battle for Atlantis with a lot of confidence, finish off your non-conference schedule, start well when you have those first two Big Ten games. Indiana's cooking at that point.
And it is a unique situation. I mean, it is the only part of the season outside of the conference tournaments where you do play games on back-to-back days. So it is tough to really judge this team, or really any team whenever you have these styles of tournaments. It is, of course, good to win them because it does show stamina when you're able to win tough games like that on back-to-back days. But you don't get that in the NCAA tournament. Even whenever you're in your isolated weekends during the NCAA tournament, those games are a day apart from each other. You do have a day of rest in between those games. So it is very unique. They're obviously fun. These are made for television events, and that's why they have them. That's why they have Bahamas. That's why they have Maui. That's why they have the Diamond Head Classic, which that's not as big of a name, of course, as the other two that I mentioned. That usually has some smaller teams, but it is still cool. I think that's the December tournament they do down in Hawaii with around Christmas time, that type of stuff like that. So it's always fun.
What's it called? Feast Week? I think that's what it's called.
Feast Week. Yeah, there's plenty of holiday hoops giving. There's so many different ones they've got.
It's my favorite. Honestly, when it comes to the basketball season, March Madness is number one. The Big Ten tournament, the conference tournaments are up there. But I love this week. It's just nonstop basketball from start to finish on Monday. Thursday, you get some basketball and then football's at the same time. You're with family. It's just a perfect combination of things. But going back to, you mentioned it, playing back to back to back, whatever. This is basically an AAU tournament on steroids in a lot of ways because there's not a whole lot of preparation. There's a lot more preparation versus an AAU tournament. Don't get me wrong there, but I'm curious to see how Mike Woodson kind of adjusts when it comes to the preparation of this team and stuff. Because I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Indiana has played in a tournament like this since he's took over as head coach. If I can remember correctly, I don't think he's played in. Obviously, he's done some traveling out to Las Vegas to play Arizona, played Kansas and stuff, but I don't remember him playing like a tournament like this. But it's going to be.
I think you're correct. I was starting to think they played in Maui, but I also think that might have been Archie Miller's last season.
They played in Maui. So right before Mike Woodson's first season, they went out and played in the Bahamas, but it was
over the off season. Yes.
Yeah. It was like against pro teams or whatever. But as far as these Feast Week tournaments, I guess you want to call them, I don't think Mike Woodson's really played anything like that. I take that back a little bit. They did play in the New York thing last year at Madison Square Garden.
That's right, because that was a twofer. It wasn't 3 days; it was 2 days.
Yeah. So this one pretty similar, different at the same time. So I mean, it's really going to test you mentally. It's going to test how ready you are. The teams that are ready to play, that get the rest and stuff, those are usually the teams that do well here. I'm curious to see how it's like with Mike Woodson preparing these guys, getting them ready for a game right after, because who knows, there might be a game where you hadn't played a game, less than 24 hours ago, and you're playing this game. So depending on where you seed out, but I want to see Mike Woodson's preparation. I want to see how they prepare from game to game to game. I think that'll tell you a lot about this Indiana team, if they're ready to go, or if they come out the first half, tired or whatever. That's a concerning sign. So as long as they, like we talked about South Carolina game, as long as they come in, be energized, ready to play some good basketball, I think they're going to do really well when it comes to Battle for Atlantis.
And of course, we'll talk more about this. You'll be down in the Bahamas for HoosierIllustrated.com. So we'll chat about the Bahamas a little bit more once we get closer to that event taking place. One more question. I want to ask you the very last question that I asked Alec the other day, and that's one particular player to show a big jump in improvement this Saturday against South Carolina. Who do you want it to be, or who do you think it'll be?
That's a good question. So I'm going to cancel out the front court guys. I'm going to cancel out Manu, Ballo and McKenzie and Bach. I'm going to cancel those out. To me, I think it's Miles Rice. I don't know what Alex said. I feel like he might have said Miles Rice if I'm reading Alex's mind correctly, but I'm going to go with Miles Rice. I want to see him make a jump. I want to see him be that point guard that we need and stuff. I want to see him push the pace and not really just push the pace, control the pace. Let him dictate how the game's going to be played. So if he can do that, be a good facilitator, know when to attack the basket, know when to be fast, know when to slow things down, limit the turnovers. That's been a little bit of his struggle lately. It's just the turnovers gets a little bit too fast for himself. But I want to see him be that guy, that facilitator. And then I'll throw in one more. I just want to see Luke Goody continue to shoot. I just want to see him knock down some shots. Well, he just needs a game. You saw a little bit of it last game in the second half. He really just needs a game where he knocks down 3 or 4 threes, and I think he'll be good to go the rest of the season.
I don't remember exactly what Alex said. For some reason, I feel like he mentioned Kanan Carlisle. But if I'm wrong,
that's a good one
again, if it's the same, really, well, as we mentioned earlier, the guards have not really had a breakout game yet, and it'd be great to see one of them do so this Saturday.
Absolutely. So it'll be curious to see. I'm excited to see more of Bryson Tucker. I really am. So
that's we haven't even met him. We're pretty much out of time here, but yeah, I mean, Alec and I talked a little bit about Bryson on earlier this week, but he's been a very interesting bright spot for Indiana this season. I'd love to see him continue to take steps forward.
Absolutely. The great thing about him is, real quickly, is that he just plays within himself, and that's the awesome thing too. And the moment's not too big for him. I think he's ready for the college game already. So just continue to get him more minutes, let him play his game, and just see what happens.
Kyler, I appreciate your time as always, and I look forward to getting further and further into basketball season. Hopefully, it continues to be a good one for the Hoosiers this time around.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.
Big thank you to Kyler Staley, as always, for his time. And always very knowledgeable on everything Indiana basketball, and look forward to checking in with him more often. And believe he will be joining me for the HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up show tomorrow afternoon for Indiana versus South Carolina. All right, let's get into some picks before we get into some non-rev shout-outs and then get out of here for the weekend. I actually want to start with tonight. I've got a two-legger tonight. And it starts with a Big Ten game, and that is UCLA versus Washington on the road at Washington, I should say. Washington, right now, they're currently 4.5-point favorites. I got this spread, I believe, at 3.5. So clearly it's showing that bettors are in favor of Washington to get the win here and cover as well. But UCLA has been on a tear, at least when we think about their expectations based on how they started the year. They're very battle tested and have had some very tough matchups, and they may be a tougher outing than people would expect. But I do think Washington will get the job done, especially being the home team in this scenario. I'm also taking Colorado State minus 9.5 against Wyoming tonight. I don't think Wyoming is a very good team, and I think Colorado State could win that game by more than a couple of touchdowns. That's why I'm taking the Colorado State Rams in that matchup. All right, I'm going to go through the Big Ten slate, and then I'll share any other games I may be betting on outside of that as we go through the Saturday slate. So we'll start off with the nooner. Ohio State taking on Northwestern on the road. Ohio State 29-point favorites. I'm not betting on this one, but this could be a sneaky, interesting game. Of course, Ohio State's probably more, even whether they'll say this or not, they're more worried about their matchup with Indiana next week at home, which is very weird for them to think about. Normally, Indiana is the game where the week after you're saying, oh, they're thinking about Michigan. Well, they can't be. Ohio State cannot lose to Indiana next week. And so if it wouldn't surprise me, Northwestern finds a way to cover this spread, even though Ohio State will still probably win this game somewhere between that 20 to 30-point range. But it isn't, of course, that weird. I was going to say the temporary stadium, but that's not the case. They're playing in Wrigley Field tomorrow afternoon. So that could be a very interesting experience, playing in a baseball stadium in this matchup. Second game, we've got Michigan State at Illinois. Illinois favored by 2.5. I am taking that spread. I think Illinois is significantly better than Michigan State, and I'm basing a lot of that off of how I saw Indiana play against Michigan State. And we've seen Illinois play really good against good competition, except for Oregon, of course. So I think with Illinois being at home, they'll find a way to win this game by more than a few points, and I think that minus 2.5 spread is a good thing to bet on this weekend. Next up, number 4, Penn State at Purdue. Penn State favored by 28.5. I mean, that seems right on the money. Penn State is taking care of business whenever they've needed to, and I don't see any reason that they'll struggle against the Boilermakers this weekend, even though it is on the road. Of course, Tom Allen defense is very familiar, or at least Tom Allen, I should say, not Penn State's defense, but Tom Allen very familiar with the Boilermakers. And, I was going to say, I mean, I guess Penn State is too, even though they probably didn't play Purdue nearly as often because they were in separate divisions, and Indiana only played Purdue because, of course, the protected rivalry. So there's that. I'm not betting on that. It's just kind of an inkling on it. So moving forward, we've got Nebraska at USC. This is a money line bet I'm going to take. USC's favored by 7.5, and that's actually crept closer and closer. When I say close, like it's gone more in Nebraska's favor. It started off, I believe, around 9.5, and I kind of think Nebraska might win this outright. They're due for a good game, and Nebraska, even though they've looked questionable at times, so is USC. I think Nebraska's in a much better situation than USC is with Lincoln Riley. I think Nebraska reaches bowl eligibility on the road this weekend, though it may be unlikely. I just have a weird feeling that the Cornhuskers are going to get it done. So that's why I'm taking Nebraska. Rutgers at Maryland. Maryland favored by 5. Maryland, really, this is a battle of two teams that had promising starts and have now had a very disappointing finish to the season. Rutgers going for bowl eligibility. Maryland still needs 2 wins. Of course, Maryland being the home team here. Not betting on this game. Don't really know what I think would happen. If I were taking anything, I'd probably just bet Maryland to win, to be honest. And then very intriguing game here. Number 1, Oregon at Wisconsin. Wisconsin's looked a lot better as of late, even though their record wouldn't necessarily show that. Oregon's favored by 13.5, and this is a road game for the Ducks. I would not be surprised to see this be closer than Oregon fans would like it to be. Just because Oregon is due for a bit of a letdown game, not necessarily a loss, but I do think this will be a tougher outing for the Ducks than maybe many would realize. I almost decided to bet on this. I almost took Wisconsin plus 13.5, but it was too iffy for me, and I'm laying off the gas on that one. So that does it for the Big Ten slate. Let me go ahead and take a look at the other ones that are non-Big Ten games that I'm taking. I'm taking WKU minus 12.5 against Louisiana Tech. That Louisiana Tech team that the Hilltoppers are facing is not really that good, and I think Nebraska or WKU can win by a couple of scores there. WVU, I'm taking West Virginia money line against their opponent, which is Baylor at home. And this, when I got in on it, it was an even. Like there was not really a spread on it, if that makes any sense. It was a pick 'em, I guess, as they say. So I guess taking the money line isn't really that big of a risk, but I like to play, so I'm taking West Virginia money line. I also like Tennessee plus 9.5 against Georgia. And even though Tennessee is on the road, I'm starting to think Georgia is just not really as good as they've been in the past. They've had a lot of off-the-field issues, and it's starting to bleed onto the field too, it seems like. Not the issues, but, you're starting to just notice things aren't really clicking the way that they had in seasons past. And I think Tennessee's playing really well right now. It almost wouldn't surprise me to see Tennessee win outright. But I think the safer play is Tennessee plus 9.5 here. And then finally, I'm taking BYU minus 2.5 against Kansas at home, by the way. None of that Kansas team coming off a big win against Iowa State, which surprised me. But at the same time, I think BYU is still playing for a lot. And maybe this is the day that BYU finally loses. Who knows? But this is a 3-6 Kansas team. They are fighting for their lives. I get it. But BYU is fighting for playoffs. And I think a 3-point spread is not too much to ask BYU to cover in this situation. So there's my picks for the week. And what else? We've got a couple more things I want to get into before we wrap this thing up. We'll get into non-revs at the very end. But here's one other thing I want to talk about. I'm take the sip of coffee real quick. I got this sore in my mouth too. It's really bothering me, and I'm trying not to think about it. But it's really, now that I've been talking for quite some time, I'm starting to really rub against, the gum line or the lip line, whatever you want to call it. But check this out. So apparently, so a Nebraska Board of Regents member has decided. Some of you are like, "What the hell are you getting into, John? This is an Indiana sports show." Well, just hear me out for a second. They're trying to think of new ways to generate revenue, and one idea that somebody on the Nebraska board suggested is that give Nebraska fans an option to be buried or cremated and put in a box within the stadium to commemorate your fandom. And that seems very strange, right? I don't know if I did the best job explaining what that is, but essentially, let's just say it like this. When you die, you have the option, instead of being buried in a stereotypical cemetery, if you want to be buried underneath the stadium at Nebraska or put into a little mausoleum of sorts with your remains, you could potentially do that. And I think that's a little creepy, especially thinking about if you were to get buried or put underneath of the stadium grounds. I mean, that sounds like you're asking for the stadium to be haunted. Am I right? Just thought that was a little funny, weird little thing. I'll just read this real quick. I'll read it. Sometimes, whenever I do that, sometimes I wonder, should I read this word for word? I might as well. Let's just go and do it from here. Without much thought or research, Whites wondered aloud whether passionate Nebraska fans would pay money to have cremated remains stored in a columbarium, a standalone structure with cubbies that house said remains. Even better, with a grass field set to be installed at Memorial Stadium in 2026, what if that columbarium was built underneath the football field as part of the renovations? And then says, then grandma or grandpa or sister or brother could be a Husker supporter forever, as if you can't be a Husker supporter in a typical cemetery. But that at least makes more sense. For some reason, I was like, there's no way they can just dig up the field and put people underneath the stadium. To have a place underneath, it's like a mausoleum type of structure. That makes a lot more sense. But it doesn't mean that you can't be haunted by these spirits. Am I right? So weird little stuff. Just wanted to share that with you here on a Friday. All right. Couple of non-revenue shout-outs. We're going to start off with some men's soccer. There's nothing new to report other than the fact that the selection show for the NCAA men's soccer tournament will be this upcoming Monday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And the Hoosiers will find out where they land after their unfortunate early exit from the Big Ten tournament. But they did have a great finish to the regular season. And we have seen Indiana teams in the past use those late season stretches to parlay that, if you will, into a really good run in the postseason. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll see what their draw ends up being on Monday afternoon. Women's volleyball. Unfortunately, these last two, not good news, I guess I should say. Women's volleyball has dropped 3 in a row, beginning with their rivalry matchup against Purdue. Number 9 Purdue last week, they lost 1-3. USC after that on Sunday, they lost 1-3 as well, and then got blanked by the Hawkeyes this past Thursday, 3-0. So not a good stretch of volleyball matches for the Hoosiers. Right before that, they won 3 in a row. Now they're back on a 3-game losing skid as they head into kind of the home stretch of the season. There's still a few games left, and coming up this weekend, they've got, oh boy, on the road at number 2 Nebraska. That will certainly be a very difficult environment for the Hoosiers. And then next Friday, they'll play at UCLA back at home. So, and then moving on to women's basketball, man, it is unfortunate the start that the Lady Hoosiers have had in Simon Scott Assembly Hall. I say one of these games was not played in Simon Scott Assembly Hall. But we already talked about their early season struggles, talked about their loss to Harvard last week. And this week they had another unfortunate result. They lost on the road at Butler, 56-46. And this is just going to show that life without Mackenzie Holmes, you have somebody like that for so long, it's going to be tough to adjust to, a different style of play without somebody that was that impactful to your team. And so hope to see the Hoosiers bounce back. I'm sure Terry Moore, and she knows she has her work cut out for her this season. But coming up this weekend, they will face Stanford at home, and then they will travel to the Bahamas for their edition of the Battle for Atlantis. After that, they will take on Columbia in their opening round before taking on two other opponents, in the same vein that the men's basketball team will do. So nice to see. I believe Indiana, the only university to have both their men's and women's team playing in the Battle for Atlantis this season. So that's a cool thing we'll keep an eye on, of course. So that'll probably do it for today's show. And I kind of feel like I might be ending a little bit earlier than normal, but I've kind of gone through all of the content for the day that I had lined up. And maybe it's good for you. Maybe you're like, you know what, John, sometimes you talk a little bit too much. It's okay to have a shorter episode every now and again. So if that's the case, hope you enjoyed this somewhat shorter edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. We'll be back with the post-game wrap-up show for men's basketball versus South Carolina tomorrow afternoon. And, of course, In Touch with Indiana Sports Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays right here on HoosierIllustrated.com. And also be sure to check out Talking About the Hoosiers. Made a guest appearance with our guy Drew Rosenberg this past Thursday. Of course, you can check out all that on the website or subscribe to Hoosier Illustrated on YouTube. And if you want to know when everything gets posted, as always, you can hit that notification bell and you'll be able to click on the video right away. So, and also leave a comment. I love your comments. Appreciate everything that comes through. I try to read those as often as I can. So until tomorrow and Monday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.